Hi everyone, I'm Vashti. I'm from the Kingdom of Callantyr, and today we're talking about how I develop cultural history classes. This is not the right way to do it or the only way to do it. This is what works for me. So take parts of this. If they work for you, get rid of what doesn't and go out and find something that works for you. First thing we're going to talk about is goals, and we're going to spend a chunk of time on this because this is probably the single most important thing that I learned how to do that took me from spouting my top 10 cool facts about a topic into having a well-organized class that had a coherent message. So, developing goals, I really start with, I usually have 3 to 4 of them. One of them is going to be a topic statement, a sort of summarizing the main topic. One of them is going to be a broad cultural connection type of statement, and then the third one can vary, and we'll go over some options for that. It can also be kind of what I've done here, which is an outline of what the class is going to be, so setting expectations right up front. We're going to talk about developing goals, we're going to talk about class format and who your audience is, and then we're going to do some tips and tricks that I've learned about teaching at the very end. And one of the big things is, if you find yourself doing something repeatedly during your process, that's your natural process. Don't fight it. For me, info dumping is part of my process. But I had to learn that that's part of it and how to make use of that. And don't be afraid to ask other people to help. So I took my info dumping, and I have a handful of people that I will info dump to, and I asked them up front, hey, I'm going to talk through some stuff with you. Can you look for places that I'm not explaining clearly, or that I am jumping so far into details that you feel like you don't have the whole story and you need more info? And they'll go ahead and ask questions, or I'll ask them to identify places I can be more specific. So then my info dumping becomes really useful, and I go away with a list of things I'm going to work on and look for sources for and really use to improve on my class. But I needed to be aware that that's what I was doing, and they needed to be aware of what I needed from them when I was doing that. So, at minimum, your goals should be kind of your main talking points, just a summary of what the class is going to be about. Well-developed goals are going to go a little bit beyond that, and they're going to be really useful to you in developing your class. There's a lot of feedback between what I research and my goals. They're going to be useful to your audience as a way to make sure the message is clear, and they're going to be really useful to you in teaching the class in terms of keeping you on topic. So well-developed goals are really important for everybody. This is not a one-and-done process. You're going to write these early on, and then you're going to continually refine them. Don't feel like you're beholden to the goals you write at the beginning. They should change as you go. And that's kind of feedback between what you're researching and writing the goals. As you research, you're going to learn a ton of different stuff, and you might end up with information that really should be 2 or 3 different classes instead of 1. That means your goals are going to change as you start to edit that info out into, hey, that's going to be another class. Editing is hard. You're not putting that information in the trash can. It's not unworthy. It's not that it's not interesting. It's just a different class. And that will let you refine your goals and make them more specific. Okay, so for the third goal, we're going to dig in the next couple slides to how to develop a good summary statement for your topic and a good cultural connection statement. But here I want to talk about what that third goal can be. And it can be a huge number of things, and that depends on what class I'm teaching as to which one makes the most sense. This is a place where you can, all of them are kind of about setting expectations at the very beginning of your class, and limiting the scope of your class is a good way to go here. Sometimes we don't have a clean start and end point for a class. It's just what info could fit in an hour. You have to kind of arbitrarily set that stopping point. Tell people that up front, because it's not always clear from the title of the class. And there's nothing more frustrating than sitting through an hour-long class and they never talked about the thing you were interested in. If you tell people up front, for example, I teach a class on Abbasid clothing, and I tell people up front, we're not going to cover veils, headgear, and veiling practices. There's just so much information that's really going to be its own class, and I'm not done reading about it yet. So I've never had anybody leave a class. I have had people go, oh, that's too bad, I was really excited for that part. But they also tell me, that was a cool class, I'm looking forward to the one on veiling. And it's like, oh, that's really validating and motivating for me to keep reading. So it also means that those people aren't going to ask questions that I'm not prepared to answer, because you've already told them that's not what this class is about. Caveats are good here, which is a lot of my classes are on the lives of medieval Muslim women. And part of what I do is talking about the things I didn't expect to find, the things that really go against what our assumptions are. And I tell people up front, hey, I'm presenting those kind of exceptions to the rule. They're not really exceptions, they happen a lot more often than we think, but they are bucking the trend of what our assumptions are. If you just take the info I present in that class and you run with it, you're going to come away thinking this was a feminist society, and it very much was not. So our assumptions about it being awful for women, and these examples are both kind of two sides of the coin, and both of them together make up the reality of the situation. It was very dynamic and depended on your individual situation. I don't want people to take the information I'm presenting and run with it too far the other direction. So I present that kind of caveat here. If you are presenting a class that is primarily theory and you're giving evidence to support that, don't shy away from presenting an example that does not fit your theory. If you found stuff that conflicts, don't ignore it and hope nobody brings it up, because somebody will bring it up. Put it out there. Tell them, hey, I'm aware of this, and I'm still doing more research to either adapt my theory or address where this fits in. You can also ask your audience, hey, if you know more about this, I would love to talk to you after class. You might find more resources that way. So absolutely acknowledge those things that don't quite fit, and you're going to be much better off doing that than just hoping nobody brings it up. So one of the main things that we do to build goals is you have to pick one topic. Medieval Muslim women is way too huge. I mean, that's an enormous topic. So I started by narrowing down to Persia. That is still huge, and we'll get into how I narrowed it down further. But from the very beginning, as you start doing your reading on whatever your broad starting topic is, start thinking about why you want to teach this. And those big why questions are going to help you build that big cultural connection statement between your topic and the big picture. And again, this is going to cause your goals to change repeatedly as you try and make them more specific and articulate them better as you start thinking about this and as you do your reading. And part of that is that you are going to be doing a huge amount of reading on a subject. Those big why questions are, not just why do you want to teach about it, but start with why does this interest you? Why do you want to learn about it? What makes it worth spending all of that time reading about? And then once you start getting that clarified a little bit better in your mind, and that comes with as you're reading about it, as you're collecting those, top 10, top 20 cool facts that you keep spouting. I kept finding, hey, women had legal rights. Women could initiate divorce. Women were active in the economy. All these things I wasn't expecting. And I went, oh, that's so cool. They're all building together to say something about that culture. And that's what was interesting me. And that's what was causing me to keep reading. I wanted to find that next cool thing. And as I started putting them together, okay, they are making a statement about this culture. What is that? That's what interested me. That's why I wanted to learn about it. And then it was, okay, that's the thing that nobody seems to know about this culture. It goes against our assumptions about it, and that's why I wanted to teach about it. So it's okay to start very broad and not having any of those ideas. Those ideas come from and are informed by all of the reading you want to do and all of those cool facts you end up info dumping to people. So totally normal to start looking at those questions by going, oh God, I have no idea. Start your reading. Just keep those in mind as you do the reading. Again, picking a main topic, I started very broad. I wanted to learn about women's lives because that's how I connect to our reenactment game. That's where I would be. Okay, that's way too broad. That's a lot of different times and places and cultures, and they were each different. So I started moving towards Persian women. Okay, that's still huge. Lots of things get called Persia. It covers a lot of time and space, and there are a lot of cultures inside that. So I ended up focusing on the Abbasid Caliphate. Okay, that's still 500 years. So I picked a couple of centuries, and I picked, okay, we're going to focus on Baghdad. That was the capital. So I've narrowed my space, I've narrowed my time, I've picked one culture. Even within that, as I did my reading, I ended up with 3 really solid classes. And as I'm reading, I'm going, oh, I have stuff on marriage and divorce, I have stuff on women's work, and as investors and employers and wage laborers. And I have stuff on concubines and women of the palace. So for process, I work in Google Documents to take notes. I open up a Google document, I put the topic at the top. I've been told this is kind of intense, so if it doesn't work for you, that's fine. I put the name of the book and the author in bold, and then I actually take notes by page number. But I don't necessarily read and take notes on every single page. As I read a book, it may have things on on each of these topics in it. So as I read and I go, ooh, that's an important thing I want to remember for that class, I go into the document about marriage and divorce. I put the page number, I put that note in there. Cool. Later on, it may have something about one of the other topics. I go into that document, I put the page number, I put it in there. What this lets me do is have all of my stuff on a topic in one document, multiple different sources, and then I can keyword search. Sometimes I make a note as broad as, hey, on page 57 in this particular book, there's a cool table of tax data, or there's a cool diagram of the irrigation system, or there's a cool data from biographical dictionaries about the prevalence of naming practices, whatever it may be. And when I want to drop that image into my PowerPoint, I don't have to go, oh crap, what book was that in? And then I think it was this one. And then I search that book and it's not there and I have to pick a different one that I thought it might be. I can keyword search the thing in my notes under the particular topic it's in and then go, hey, it's this book and this page. And I can go take a picture and drop it in. It saves me a bunch of time. So that's my process. It may be a little too detailed for you. Find a way that works for you. But start broad, start narrowing down, and each time you do, your goals will get more specific, which is what you want. And we all start by, hey, here are the cool facts I'm learning. That's totally fine. Start with those and start with these kind of questions in mind on them and figuring out what those cool facts together, what they're saying about that culture, and that's going to become your goal. So I started out with, okay, medieval Muslim women, and it's really cool to see how their lives are similar or different from my life, from what I expected to find about their lives. And this is really how I connect to the reenactment game. Okay, that's really still very broad. I ended up with the women of the Abbasid Caliphate had legal rights and were regularly active in the economy. This is my topic statement from my class on women and wage labor. So moving in between there was all of those cool facts we were picking up. And it took dozens of rewrites to get to that sentence. And I do not write very well. It takes a lot for me to get the words right when I try and just put them from my brain onto the page. I am much more verbal, so I talk this out with anyone that will listen. My husband will never take my classes. He's heard them 24 times by the time I get to teaching a class. Same thing with my peer. I talk this out with her. She asks questions. Sometimes she just says, "You're on the right track. Keep making it more specific." And sometimes I go, "Oh God, I've already done that 12 times. How do I get more specific?" You keep reading. You keep reading and you keep thinking and talking about it or writing it down if that's your process. It will get there. So trying to move from, hey, here's my topic, into your goals. List your cool facts. If that means you're talking about them, great. If that means you're writing them down, that works too. Group them by theme. Okay, that was my, hey, women's lives. That's too broad. Okay, I have marriage and divorce. I have women in the economy. I have concubines and women of the palace. Okay, those are my themes. Let's split our facts up among those themes. So if you think about your topic statement as one end of the bridge and your big cultural connection piece as the other end of the bridge, I'm talking about women's lives. That's my topic. And then my big cultural connection pieces tend to talk about the assumptions that we have that are very much based out of the inheritance we got from the Victorians, that are sexist and racist and imperial and just awful in a lot of ways. And we still have a lot of these assumptions ingrained in us. I also tend to talk about how important cultural context is for my big cultural connection goals. While that inheritance we got from the Victorians is awful, it is usually based in a kernel of truth somewhere. Women did live in seclusion, some of them, at some times, in medieval Muslim cultures. If you try to apply that broadly to all of the cultures, all of the time, and all of the women within those cultures, it becomes less and less true the more broadly you try to apply it. So I tend to make my big cultural connection pieces about our assumptions and the importance of cultural connection. So on one side I have a topic, marriage and divorce, and on the other side I have these big cultural statements. In between there is where all of your cool facts are going to go, and they are the evidence supporting that bridge from one statement that's very specific about your topic to the other statement that's very big picture connection about the culture in general. So each time you add a fact or rearrange your facts, your topic statement is going to get refined, your main idea is going to get refined, and ultimately that big cultural connection goal is going to get refined. You don't have to rewrite each of those every time you add a new fact. You can do it every 3 to 5 facts. Once you've made some changes, go back and see if those ideas you wrote down a while ago are still actually what the class is about. I have to do this still for classes, especially for classes I've taught for a while now. I'm still reading, I'm still adding new things to them, I'm still tweaking them. So every year or so, if I know I've made changes in that intervening time, I'll go back and look at my goals and look at how I'm presenting information and say, okay, are the goals still really what I'm talking about in this class, or do I need to update those? So it's never done. You're never done with research. You're never done with adjusting and fiddling with how you're saying the thing and what are you saying. But this is kind of how I wrapped my mind around what are the cool facts and how do those connect to these bigger statements I'm trying to make. So just kind of a summary, info dumping is fine. if that is natural to you. It tends to get disparaged a bit as something that neurodivergent people do. It can be a useful thing. You just have to be aware of what you're doing and make the people you're info dumping to aware of what you're doing and what kind of feedback you need from them. And again, I talk not just about the cool facts, but about those big picture statements. I have to talk them through. Once I can articulate them decently, I can write them much easier. If writing is your thing, by all means do it that way. If writing is difficult for you, try to do it verbally first and work your way through it that way. So, my background color just changed. That means we've switched topics. This is something I do in all of my classes, in all of my PowerPoints. For teaching online in particular, it helps the audience know that we are making progress in the slides. You don't have that energy feedback between two people when you're teaching online. This even subconsciously catches people's attention and draws them back into the PowerPoint. It's also very helpful for me as an instructor. If I get an interruption, I can come quickly back to my PowerPoint and have an idea of, oh yeah, this is what we're talking about. So for class format, we're going to start from the very beginning. As you've done a ton of research, you're ready to start trying to put things together in a class. I will tell you now, you're going to have to go back and do more research. When you start building a class, you're going to find there are gaps almost every time. That's totally normal. So you did a bunch of research and that informed starting to write your goals. Now those goals are going to help inform you building the class. And for building my classes, I actually do this in Google Slides because it's really easy to rearrange things. Each of my cool facts goes as a title for a slide, and I give each cool fact like 2 slides because maybe I have an image and maybe I want it, and then maybe I have a text slide. So I start with that assumption. I get all of those outlined. I have my goals at one end and my conclusion at the other, and my cool facts are in between. That's my outline. Each one of those is like a bullet point for an outline. But now I can drop in images without screwing up the formatting, since that always happens to me in Word documents. And if I decide this piece is really better 2 slides down or 2 slides up, it's very easy to rearrange. And then when I get to the end of that, as I build from that outline, I'm already in the PowerPoint. I don't have to redo it in another system later. So as you start doing that process, look at who your audience is and what class you want to teach. This should be a very conscious decision that you make. And we're going to go through some examples of them and kind of benefits or disadvantages to them, or just, there aren't really disadvantages to them, they're just things you need to think through a little bit more with some of them rather than others. So for a general overview class, hey, Jello is period is kind of a general overview title. It's not. That's a joke that I do to keep me focused. It sticks in my brain well. I do lots of little things that amuse myself during my classes. So I've done classes where I've worked in as many Muppet references as possible into the title of the slides. Or song lyrics, or, weird literary references. Whatever will help it stick in my mind. Because then if I walk into an event and somebody comes up and says, hey, we had 4 teachers cancel, can you teach something? Happens more often than you'd expect with cultural history classes because I don't have supplies I have to prep and bring with me. It's just me talking. So it's happened twice in the last 6 months. I can pull up my PowerPoint on my phone and just sit down and start talking to people. But as I review my notes on my phone, those funny and amusing things click in my brain and I go, oh yeah, that's this one, I can talk about this. And I know, based on which references are being made, it helps me not go off on tangents when I have to talk on short notice. So So Jello is definitely not period. That's just me helping this stick in my brain. For a general overview, lots of new instructors like to try to do a general overview. It is very difficult to do it well for new instructors. It is a great starting point. There's nothing wrong with doing it. I love when more experienced teachers do general overviews because they are a little bit better at creating format for themselves. And that's really where newer teachers struggle, is how to organize and format all of that cool information they've taken in. This is just sharing basic cultural context. But frequently for new teachers, the language stays very vague. They don't define scope very well. And it's just them trying to share all of the info and they don't know how to organize it. So that tends to be where the struggle is with this part. For helping with vague language, that is always the first step I tell people when they're ready to start improving on a class. Anytime in my outline that I say they or in period, I put it in a different color font and I make it bold, because that's my cue to go back and look that up and make it more specific. I also do that with any cultural terms to remind myself to go in and give a definition of that so that my audience will know what I'm talking about. That's kind of the first step to it. The other step is limiting that scope right at the beginning. Okay, we're going to talk about this, but we need to, in period is very big. Let's set specific dates. Let's pick some, even if you're going to do several cultures, let's pick a few and not just leave it open-ended like that. Start to give yourself that definite framework to work in. That way you know how to edit for building the class. A comparison is a really good way to go for newer teachers because it gives you that framework right off the bat. So period, Jello, English and German types. Okay, period is still very broad, but we've already defined it to 2 specific cultures. So automatically your language has already gotten more specific just from the title of the class. You've given yourself some framework. Hopefully you've picked the same couple of centuries for each of the cultures, otherwise you're comparing apples and oranges. But even from the outset, just how you think about doing a comparison style class, it inherently has some structure to it. So in this, you can talk about how the general assumptions about Jello types holds up or doesn't hold up when you apply it to different cultures. Is it actually true for both of these cultures or only one of them? You can talk about how those cultural contexts are different and how those differences led to the development of different types. But from the outset, the way your brain already thinks about this is within a framework, so it makes it much easier to move forward with trying to build the class. So a deep dive is another style, and an example of that is period Jello, the development of lime flavor in the 13th century. So we haven't given you a specific culture in the title here, but we've given you the century and a specific flavor, so we've already made it way more specific than the other classes. So within this, your language is going to be super specific. You're going to be talking about 1, maybe 2 at most cultures. You may focus on one culture specifically and then give a few examples of differences from other cultures, but even more than just spitting out a whole bunch of different facts like you would in a general overview, you're really situating facts inside a cultural context. So you're talking about what led to this specific flavor at this time. You're going to see a lot more use of primary sources within this kind of class. So you're going to get statistics and graphs and charts. You're going to get tax records and legal records and any sort of recipe books. For my clothing classes, I use trousseau lists a whole bunch. You're going to get into that kind of work with primary sources. But you have to remember not to bury your audience in the data. It's not just oh cool, look at all this information, those primary sources, those graphs and charts, are evidence supporting your big statements at the beginning. They're supporting your goals. So each time you move from one cool piece of evidence to the next, each time you change from one slide title to the next, you move from one bullet point in your outline to the next, you want to tie the thing you just talked about back into those goals. So you're going to give kind of, it's like a little mini conclusion statement each time you switch from one piece of evidence to the next. You're going to tie that back into, hey, this is how this supports those big statements I made. Otherwise, people are going to feel like you've kind of gone off on tangents. They don't make those connections themselves. You have to make those connections for them. So at the end of each, here's really cool information, and this is how it supports that statement. And then you're going to be ready to move on to that next piece of evidence. So an argument type of class, this is really when you're coming up with your own thesis statement, and people tend to get very nervous and afraid of the word thesis. We've been working with a thesis this entire time. That whole idea of making a statement and presenting evidence to support it. You have a theory, you're making a claim, and you're supporting it with evidence. That's what a thesis is. That's essentially what an argument statement is. So, period Jello, the myth. Yeah, it's not real. That's going to be your claim. This is a little bit more of an advanced level. You've consumed enough information that you are making connections between the sources you've read that those sources don't actually make for themselves. And that can be intimidating. So I've read a book about climate change and how that affected cotton production in Persia. And I've read a book about how Islam coming to Persia really changed fashion from silk to cotton. So I ended up with a class and lots of other sources supporting it, but those were the two I started with, and I built a class about how fashion changes are really representative of bigger cultural changes, including politics and religion, happening in a culture. Those two books didn't make that statement, I did. That's really not what they were talking about. So once you've done a ton of reading, and in terms of doing your reading, when I say start broad, you may only find stuff that talks about, particularly for stuff like women's history, it's hard to find a whole book on that. You may only get a book that has a chapter on it or a paragraph on it. That's okay. At least skim the rest of the book to know what they're talking about. That information becomes your cultural basis for this, and it lets you get to the point where you can make these kind of connections. Also, it's okay to be wrong. I swear every 10 years, the whole field of history decides what we did in the last 10 years was wrong, and here's the new thing. Again, every time I teach a class, something changes. Every year, I've learned new stuff, and I go in and I update the classes with the new stuff I've learned. And sometimes I learned that I was wrong. Absolutely update that class and teach it again. And in your class description say, hey, I was wrong, and this has been updated with a bunch of stuff. Come learn about how I was wrong. People don't want to hear how they were wrong, but they'll come learn about how I was wrong. It's very much okay to be wrong about stuff. Just be upfront and accepting of that, and be forthcoming with that. And here's the new information. I'm always very excited to find out I was wrong, because now I've learned new stuff. It's okay to present things in that light. Okay, so in my classes, I have a title slide, I have my goals slide, and then the very next slide is a map. And most of the people who take my classes do not have a background in Persian history, So I set the context for them while I have that map up there. I spend very little time on where because the map is there and it's highlighted. They can see where. I spend more time on when, and then I spend the most time on who. And this is going to be 5 minutes or less of my class. It's really just setting the stage. I actually try and keep it down to 3 minutes or less at this point. So when I tell people we're going to talk about 8th to 10th century Persia, that really doesn't mean anything without the rest of the cultural context that the people taking my class don't have. So I give them just a sentence or two. Okay, it's not just the 10th century. Is that the beginning of the dynasty? And if it's the beginning, have they just come to power? Are they stable and secure in their power, or are things a little shaky yet? Is it the end of the dynasty? Are they being besieged on all sides by people trying to take over? Is this the golden era of your dynasty? Is it a time of war? Is there a plague? Is there a famine? Is there a drought? What is actually going on during this time frame? Give them, a couple of facts, just a sentence or two, and that's enough to make that reference to a century more meaningful for them. Now, I spend the most time on who because everything gets called Persia. Indigenous Persians are called the Persian Empire. I talk about the Abbasid Caliphate, which is an Arab Islamic group that came in and took over and put their capital in Baghdad. It still gets called Persia even though it's not ruled by Persians. And then you have Central Asian Turks that come in. It's still called Persia. So it's Persians, it's Arab Muslims, it's Central Asian Turks. It's all referred to as Persia. So which group my class is really focusing on is important. So there's the fact of which group we're going to focus on, but kind of like saying 10th century, just saying Arab Muslims in Persia doesn't mean a whole lot. So I give a sentence or two about the society, what are the major rules that the audience needs to know about how this society functioned, and who are the other groups they're interacting with, and what are those relationships like. That gives them, that little bit of background, that little bit of stage setting. It makes everything you're talking about connect a little bit more, and it makes it more relevant. So in 5 sentences, roughly, I give them where, when, and who with enough context that things mean a little bit more. So for outlining, I know those are going to be my first 3 slides: the title slide, the goals, the map. Whenever I get started, I set those up. And then I put each of my cool facts on a slide, and I give them 2 slides per cool fact. And then I start looking at that outline. I will actually just go into my Word document and I will cut and paste stuff for each cool fact onto those slides, and then I'll work on reducing the language until I'm down to just the top couple of things I want to say about each one. But looking at that outline, you should be able to work from your goals statements through that evidence to your conclusion. And that's going to let you know what you know and what gaps you have in your knowledge. So then you go back and you do more research on those gaps so that you can add to your class, because you're never done researching. But it also helps identify not just the gaps in your knowledge, but what you really want to say about this class, so then your goals will change again. You're also going to reverse outline, because this should work both directions. So you start with your conclusion statement, you work your way back through the evidence, and you should tie out at your goals. If you get off topic somewhere in your evidence, cut that piece out, it becomes part of a different class. If anything doesn't connect, it doesn't belong in this class. And if you find a gap, go ahead and fill in a slide with what you want to find, what connection piece you're looking for, and then go out and look for resources on that. Outlining, I outline all the time. I essentially only work in outline at this point because I don't actually like writing papers. My research paper process is exactly this same method. I just end it with teaching a class, essentially from an outline in PowerPoint. Yep, so that's just kind of a review of what we're doing from building from that outline. You get a couple of slides per cool fact, per piece of evidence. You have an intro to your topic, you have detailed info in your evidence, and then you tie it all back into your big picture statements and your goals. Hey, we switched background color again. So these are just going to be a couple of slides on some tips and tricks that will strengthen your class and your teaching presentation. Cultural history does not lend itself to a lot of images that are relevant, the same way talking about extant objects or constructing garments or constructing extant objects would do. So instead, I need to break up my wall of text. I need to include some images in the PowerPoint, especially for teaching online. It gets very dull to just look at slide after slide of text. So I pull in relevant artwork from the cultures we're talking about. I'll pull in pieces of pottery, I'll pull in some miniature paintings or some statues. If it is just to break up the wall of text, that is fine. Otherwise, if you're trying to use artwork as evidence of the statements you're making, you need to give it context, and that means you're going to have to do more research on it. Medieval artwork had different trends, there were different schools of art, there were different artistic conventions. They were very specific and intentional in the art they were making. A lot of societies were not literate, and artwork was how they taught. This is an entire language unto itself that the artist was using to say very specific things, and the audience would have understood them in very specific ways. You have to get a base level of knowledge in that language in order to explain it to your modern audience who won't understand it otherwise. And you have to have a base level of understanding of that language to be sure it actually supports the statements you're trying to make. Or are you making those claims based on a misunderstanding? So if you are trying to use art as evidence, you're going to have to do some research on artwork of that period. If you're just using them to break up the wall of text, that's cool, go for it. I absolutely love for artwork to be used. I just wish it was used appropriately more often, and it does take work. When you have your class outlined and your goals are written and your slides are all together and you know what you want to say, practice it. I tend to, at this point, I talk from my phone a lot. When I started, I would print out the actual thing. Topic headings are always in bold. Because I do it in PowerPoint, I actually keep the font usually around 18 or 20 for the topic headings. That's my security blanket. I don't actually read from it anymore, but I still like to have it in front of me. Practice out loud with a timer. It's different than practicing in your head. Sometimes you can think a thing, but when you try and say it out loud, it's a tongue twister. That's good to know before you get up in front of an audience. You can think about it in a different phrasing so that you're ready to say it in a way that works for your mouth and tongue. Times will vary. That's the other thing. Sometimes I teach a class and it's an hour, sometimes I teach a class and it's 45 minutes, and I wonder what I missed. Depends on the audience, depends on how many questions they have, depends on if I was running late to that event and I'm flustered and I'm talking faster because of that, or if I had plenty of time to relax before the class. Practicing out loud with a timer will give you a base level of, I can talk through all of this information with no interruptions in an hour. That's fine. It also gets you used to hearing your own voice, which is a good thing. And you got to remember to breathe when you're up in front of people. It's going to feel very awkward to just stop and take a breath or two. It doesn't feel awkward to your audience. They're not even going to notice it. If anything, they'll think you sound calmer and the pacing is better. Particularly if people interrupt you or you feel flustered, stop and breathe. It helps calm you down. It helps give you time to think through what's going on. If you get through a class remarkably quickly and you're going, oh no, I have extra time to fill, don't get flustered. Talk about your bibliography slide, where your specific examples came from, if you included any primary source data. Talk about what sources those came out of, which was your favorite, which is easiest to read, which was most affordable, most worthwhile, most value for the price. People actually really enjoy when I'm able to do that. So some ideas for inside versus outside classes, because I'm not doing classes that have a lot of setup and cleanup and a lot of material to bring with me, my inside versus outside is very similar. I tend to not print handouts because they get shoved in a bag, they get lost, they get stepped on, they get stuff spilled on them. They don't end up being useful a lot. I will post them online after the event. So I print one for me, or I have them on my phone. But ask questions if you've never taught for this event in this group before. Does your classroom have an electrical outlet? That's an important question if you plan on having a projector. Nothing's worse than lugging a computer and a projector in and finding out the classroom doesn't have an electrical outlet, or the only one in the room is in a place where you can't project onto anything. Same thing for tables and chairs. What is the group providing? Nothing worse than teaching at an outside event and them saying, absolutely, come teach a class, and there's no shade fly or picnic structure or tables or chairs, and yeah, you can do the thing wherever. Oh, okay. Ask them to provide a shade fly for you. I don't necessarily need a table, but ask if chairs will be provided or if you need to bring them. Same thing, I don't typically bring handouts, but since you won't have a presentation for people to look at, sometimes it's nicer to provide handouts if you're not comfortable with everyone just staring at you for an hour. It's taken me a while to get used to that, and I'm good with it now, but early on I would still print handouts for my outside classes. If you have to bring your own shade and chairs, or if you're teaching a class that has supplies, how close is the parking lot? How far do you have to transport all that crap? Ask for help with that. Do not do it all on your own. There's nothing worse than exhausting yourself and then having to teach an hour class. You want to come into this rested and excited and ready to talk. So if you've had to make 12 trips back and forth up a hill to the parking lot to carry chairs, that's not what you want to do before class. Ask someone for help. Arrange it ahead of time if you can. Offer somebody a ride in exchange for help with setup and cleanup. Same thing, after you've set up and taught an hour class, cleanup is going to feel exhausting. Again, you want to put your energy into teaching. Arrange for help ahead of time with setup and cleanup. Most of my cultural history classes are just me walking in and talking. I don't have a lot to do with that. That's also because I've learned to ask the event ahead of time. Hey, can you provide a shade fly? Will you have tables and chairs? I can just walk in and sit down and teach because I don't have to bring stuff. There were several classes early on where that wasn't the case because I didn't know to ask. So please learn from that mistake. So questions and interruptions. You can, again, set it up front. Do you want people to hold their questions till the end? Just tell them that at the beginning. I now frequently will tell people, ask questions as we go. It's much easier for me to talk about the stuff when we're at that point in the class, rather than trying to skip around after the fact and bring that stuff back into my mind. But early on, questions would throw me off. So I asked people to hold them until the end. You do whatever your preference is. There's not a right way to do it. There's the way that works for you. But it's fine to make that statement up front so that you're comfortable and they know you're going to save time for questions. 90% of interruptions are because people are excited that you're teaching your class and they want to connect with you. It still is a little flustering when people interrupt. Prepare responses. This is also where you should stop and take a breath or two. I stop and breathe, I smile, and I tell them, "That was really interesting. Thanks so much for sharing that." And then I've prepared responses all the way along the line, getting more strict up to asking people to leave the class. I've only had to do that once. It doesn't come up much. It is okay if somebody is there who is being rude, who is interrupting just for the sake of challenging you. To remind them that you have a limited amount of time and you want to be sure you get to cover the information you've prepared, and ask them to stop interrupting. If you're not sure that they're just being rude, and you think, I think they just want to connect and can't help themselves, you can tell them, "That's really interesting. I'd love to hear more about it after the class." Or a combination of those where it's, "I'm afraid we're going to run out of time to cover the prepared material. Can I ask you to stop interrupting and we'll talk more after class, because I am interested in hearing more about that." That way you're not embarrassing them, but you are slightly calling out their behavior and making them aware of it, because sometimes they're really not. They're just excited. If you are not comfortable asking someone to leave your class or calling them out, it's okay to have a plant in the audience. If you have someone who is a known behavior problem, definitely do this. Sometimes it also just helps to have a friendly face in the audience. Ask a friend to attend your class. Then it just feels like you're nerding out with a friend. You can focus on them. But yeah, I have sat in on people's classes, and after we agreed on 4, after the 4th interruption by this same person, and it was very clear this person is definitely just challenging authority on this. They wanted to show off that they are the most well-versed person on this. Yeah, I finally just looked at the person and said, "I came here to hear what this teacher had prepared on the class. I'd really like to hear from her. Can you stop?" And then the instructor hasn't been rude. The person can either stop or they can get upset that I did that and leave. Their call. You can also, especially if it's a known behavior problem from a particular person, talk to the event steward, talk to the group seneschal of the people hosting, and ask them how they would like you to handle this. But definitely do what you can ahead of time to be prepared for things so that you're not flustered when they come up. Always stop and breathe first, and always smile and start by thanking people. 90% of the time, they are just excited you're there. And that is all I've got for you guys on teaching. I hope it is helpful. Remember to take what works and leave the rest if it doesn't work for you.